This is Free to Exchange, the show where free-thinking scholars, free markets, and, ironically, free public television all meet. I'm your host, Ben Powell. On today's show, we're going to talk about how democracies often lead us to adopt inefficient policies. Then, in the second half of the show, we're going to examine how some democracies and dictatorships have been functioning in Latin America lately. I'm often asked, if the free market is so good, why do we have so much government regulation? The short answer is, what makes political sense often doesn't make economic sense. It's no accident. There are inherent features of democracies that make them choose bad policies. In fact, a hero of mine, H.L. Mencken, once said, "A good politician under democracy is quite as unthinkable as an honest burglar." My guest today is an expert on how democracies malfunction. Dr. Bryan Caplan is professor of economics at George Mason University. He's also author of The Myth of the Rational Voter: Why Democracies Choose Bad Policies. Bryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me, Ben.
All right. Well, you've written this book, The Myth of the Rational Voter. And, you know, we're economists. We usually think about people as rational consumers and producers trading in markets. What makes them a myth of a rational voter? Are these people just crazy, or what's going on?
Well, if you take a look at human beings, sometimes they form their beliefs very calmly and reasonably, and this is the kind of thing that you're likely to see in a business person who is deciding what to buy or sell. But at other times, people form their beliefs very emotionally. They adopt views that sound good, that make them feel good about themselves, and aren't very interested in the facts. This is especially clear nowadays in politics, where you really can see that people from all political views tend to engage in a lot of wishful thinking.
So they tend to be things that people get emotional. So we're rational when we walk down the grocery store aisle and choose our cereal, but next thing you know, when we're talking about should we invade Iraq or something, people have a different calculation they're doing?
Well, a big part of it is that when you make a bad decision as a consumer, you suffer for it. You actually learn from experience. You're the one who pays the price. But when you make a bad decision as a voter, what happens? The same thing that would have happened anyway, because you're just one little grain of sand on the sea. You don't have very much effect on policy. This is why you often see that people actually try to flee from countries that have the very policies the person officially likes, because the policies that they believe in theory are a good idea aren't ones they actually want to live under in practice.
So there was this movie a couple of years ago, right? The Swing Voter, where one guy had like the outcome. So in that case, you'd expect him to be pretty rational, but when we're in a sea of 300 million potential voters, then basically we're not going to change the outcome.
Yeah, that's right. So if your decision actually changes what happens to you, you tend to calm down and think about it quite a bit more. So when you think about ordering a restaurant, if you order chicken, you generally get chicken. On the other hand, if you go and vote for a really bad policy, what do you get? You get exactly the same policy you would have gotten if you would voted the other way, because you're just one little guy and the world does not revolve around you.
So that means we don't kind of get the same feedback mechanism when we are making these.
Yeah, you don't get the same feedback, and you just don't get the same reason to calm down. So one of my favorite illustrations of how rational people are, when people say things about politics that just seem obviously wrong to me, I'll often say, fine, let's just make a bet. You think the world is this way, I say it's another way. Why don't we put some money on it, and then we'll go to an objective source and find out what the truth of the matter is, and then whoever loses will pay. And people are very reluctant to take these deals, even when they claim that they had the truth for sure. When you put some money on it, people suddenly think, wait a second, maybe I actually don't have the truth. Maybe I was just making stuff up and saying stuff that sounded good, and maybe I don't want to risk my money just for my own ego.
So what are some of the type of things that people tend to make irrational decisions about when they become voters instead of when they're consumers?
And there's a lot of different areas, but partly since I am an economist, I focus a lot on the economic errors the public has. So it's no surprise that the public isn't very interested in economics, but what is surprising is that people who have never studied it still generally have very strong opinions about it. And the opinions they have are generally the ones that economics teachers try to tell them to stop having.
Yeah, this is kind of funny, right? Like when I go to my mechanic, I don't have strong opinions about how my fuel injection works, so I don't get mad when he tells me something. But when you and I talk to a normal person, quite often they get kind of frustrated.
Yes. Only with the mechanic, at least you have maybe you're lying to me in order to get some money off of me. Maybe you're lying to trick me. But when an econ professor tells you something you don't agree with, what does he actually get out of telling you something that's wrong? Something like the kind of thing, something about anti-market bias. So non-economists tend to be a lot more pessimistic about the social effects of how markets will work. There are plenty of economists who worry about markets, but their worry is very different from that of the general public. The general public tends to worry when someone is making money. Economists tend to worry when someone is making money solving a problem. Economists tend to worry when someone isn't making money solving a problem. So the public will get worried about someone is going to sell human kidneys. Won't that be terrible? Economists are more worried, well, what if there is no market for kidneys? Won't that be terrible?
Brian, you're awesome. Episode number 2 of this series was on markets for organs. It was great.
I'm glad to hear it.
So anti-market bias, and then other major economic
So like another really big
or...
one, so anti-foreign bias. I mean, most people, you can eventually talk them into the idea of when a person buys something from another person, both are probably better off, assuming they're both Americans. But if it's an American buying something from a Chinese, this is where the hairs on the back of people's necks tend to go up, and they look, there are other countries involved, foreigners. Now do you see why something terrible is about to happen when China sells us cheap toys? And the economists, they're saying, no, I don't really see the difference. It's actually basically the same. The fact that there's another country and the people in it speak a different language is really irrelevant in terms of if you buy something from them, you're better off, they're better off. And yet it is very hard for economists to convince their students of this simple truth, even though when people go and buy at Walmart, the fact that they're buying a lot of stuff from China doesn't seem to bother them as long as the quality's high and the product's cheap.
Yeah, and this is a classic insight, of course, that we've had since Adam Smith in economics hundreds of years ago.
Right on my tie.
That's right, you got the tie on today. So what economists would say is freer trade would be more efficient, and you're going to tell me we don't get it basically just because people don't buy it.
Yeah, so the most popular view about international trade is foreigners are trying to rip us off or take advantage of us, and if we were to go and impose high tariffs or trade barriers, this would reduce the ripping off. And really, to most people, the only reason to trade with other countries is that they'll buy our stuff if we buy theirs. For economists, this is really kind of the mind. This really brings back that classic parental question: if all your friends were jumping off the Brooklyn Bridge, would you? If every other country in the world were to not buy stuff from other countries, the basic economic logic says it's still in your interest if you do allow people from your country to buy stuff from other countries, because it is a way that you can get cheap stuff. And if the fact they're not buying your stuff, it's bad for them. But ultimately, at least you can get something out of the deal rather than nothing.
So let's focus on the part about democracy choosing bad outcomes then. So in this case then, lots of times, in fact, when I'm talking with guests, we might talk about these evil anti-market politicians who are putting in these inefficient policies on us. Do you not have any blame for them?
Well, I think most of it is that politicians are trying to be popular. Democracy is a special kind of popularity contest. And if most people think that free trade is a bad idea, you're not going to win votes by telling them, I realize you don't believe in free trade, but I'm going to give you an hour-long lecture about why you're mistaken, and let's begin with comparative advantage. That is not the way that you win a political debate. The way you win a political debate is by pandering. I mean, should you blame politicians for doing this? I'd say, blame them in the same way that you blame anyone who tells people the lies they want to hear. Say, look, really, you shouldn't be lying. You should take the high road. I understand why you do it this way, which is that you want to be a politician, wield power. But it is kind of a shameful thing to do. Although I will say, writing my book, it did give me a bit more sympathy for politicians in that, yes, I realized, look, if they did not tell the public the nonsense they want to hear, they would not be in office. So I think many politicians actually know better. They would like to do better things, and if they could get away with it, they would. And this is actually a lot of my story for why democracy isn't a lot worse, is that there are many politicians who actually know some economics. They realize that if they really did just what the public said, it would be a disaster. So they try to, on the one hand, preach what the public wants to hear, but then kind of undo it or tone it down when they actually get their hands on the wheels of power.
There was I said something about Mencken in the opening. He had some other quip, and it was like, the politician who goes and tries to preach sanity to the crowd soon learns that it causes them a great deal of discomfort, and then start saying, hooey, and next thing you know, the applause comes, and all is lost from there. So what you're saying, that kind of the slippage, sometimes they might correct it. Of course, they could also derail it too, right? So you've got slippage that they do something kind of crazy that the public wants, but then they can pervert it into their own interest a little bit too, right? Yeah,
just the main thing that I would say is before I study public opinion, I was always asking, why is democracy as bad as it is? After I studied public opinion, I was saying, wow, why isn't democracy a lot worse than it is? Because if you really listen to exactly what the public seems to say, it would be a disaster. Right, so I think there are times when politicians adopt policies that are worse than what the public thinks, but on average, it looks very much like politicians are doing something better than what the public thinks, and it is an interesting question as to why that's going on. But it does seem that if you just compare the world as it is to the world as voters say they want it to be, right now, we're in a pleasant television studio, we're having this conversation, television exists. These are all things where if you really were to listen to the general public, you wonder how much civilization would even survive.
Gosh. All right. So you are saying something pretty radical here, though. I mean, most people, have been brought up to think, democracy, great. We've been taught it since we were young in school. So Churchill has had the famous quote, right, where it was, it's
just like on page 3 of my book.
Just like on page 3 of your book. So are you trashing democracy here? What are you suggesting?
Well, I want to take people's illusions about democracy away. I'm certainly not saying that dictatorship is better than democracy.
Okay.
Again, I think dictatorship is even worse. But what I am saying is that democracy is very disappointing. The idea that if we just put all power into the hands of the people, that everything is going to work well, or that whatever goes wrong in democracy is just because we're not listening to the public, is wrong. And the way that I often think about it is like, what is the point of writing a book like this? I think it's really very much like the point of getting alcoholics to admit they have a problem. Just to say the fact that most people think something doesn't make it true. A lot of things that are widely believed are mistaken, and maybe we should reconsider the possibility that the public actually is mistaken about a great many things, and at least be open to the possibility. That is a big part of the message that I'm pushing, is just don't be so sure that just because something is popular that it's a good idea, or that it's unpopular it's a bad idea.
Yeah, or I could take away another lesson from the book. It could be, we just have to recognize that people aren't as rational when they decide in the democratic process instead of in the marketplace. Yes, absolutely. This could just be an argument for, we should still have democracy, but we should limit it from choosing lots of things. Like maybe it shouldn't choose how we do healthcare. Maybe we should let them be consumers of healthcare. Would this be a correct way to interpret this?
Absolutely. So if you take a look at the countries in the earth that are called democracies, most of them have a lot of anti-majoritarian rules. So the Supreme Court, nine unelected judges get to decide whether things are constitutional or not. How is that democratic? Or every state has 2 senators regardless of population. How is that democratic? Or Congress will pass no law establishing religion. How is that democratic? These are all, in a sense, violations of democracy. But you could say, well, democracy is broadly defined to include a wide range of governments, including governments that don't give the majority final say in a lot of things. And one way that you can not give the public final say is just by having government not actually be involved in an area at all. Right? Just like with religion under American democracy, where it's not that there's some particular policy towards religion, but rather government is prevented from having a policy, which then gives us a better result than if it were a political football.
All right. Well, a controversial but very powerful message that you're bringing, Bryan. Thank you for joining today.
Thank you very much, Ben.
If you think we have a dysfunctional government, just wait until you hear from our next guest. He's an expert on Latin America. Stick around.
Free to Exchange is a joint project of Texas Tech's Free Market Institute and Texas Tech Public Media. More information is available at fmi.ttu.edu.
You have a straightforward choice before you.
And you think I should choose life?
Come back here, Pookie!
We wanted to send Carl out by simply doing a good radio show.
Why start now, Peter?
Tell me what your understanding is of what happened.
Come on, snap out of it, will you? You're on National Public Radio.
Once you become part of the Red Raider family, it's forever.
Lubbock's just not a bad place to be or be from.
Are you really going to keep that?
That is so cool.
Welcome back. Joining me now is Dr. Nicolas Cachanosky. Dr. Cachanosky is an assistant professor of economics at Metropolitan State University in Denver. He's also a regular commentator in the media in Latin America, and he is a native of Argentina. I'm also proud to say that he's a former PhD student of mine. Nicolas, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
All right, so you're an economist, but you're from Latin America, originally from Argentina. A lot of people in the United States, we just did an episode in this series on immigration recently. They think of most of Latin America as being poor and trying to migrate here. This wasn't always the case for all of the countries, though. You're from Argentina. What was it like there 100 years ago?
Well, that wasn't always the case, in fact. If you look at the turn of the century, like 1880s until 1930s, the GDP per capita for anyone living in Argentina was among the maybe 5 most rich countries in the world.
You were one of the 5 richest countries in the world in 1900, Argentina
Exactly.
was.
So Argentina was at the same level of wealth as United States, Australia, Italy, the wealthiest countries at that time.
How would they become wealthy?
Well, through immigration. Argentina was a big country. There wasn't population there, and there was a lot of opportunities to work in commerce and in growing food in the land. The Pampas is a very productive area in the geography. So migration came, people came to Argentina, they started to produce, they came with nothing. It was a quite, if you want, free country in the sense that you just drop by, start your work, and go from there.
So this was very different than a lot of Latin America experiencing from the Spanish coming there. So it wasn't like there's resources and the people there to extract from. It was not as many resources or as many people, so.
Well, you can divide it in 2 periods. The first period is when European missions came to Latin America to drag like precious metals and ship them back to Europe. And so that was at the beginning of the 19th century. Later on, you had this second wave of migration, which is the people that built the countries in Latin America and this wealth that was common 100 years ago.
But Argentina is the only one of them that actually grew that wealthy at the turn of the century.
It wasn't maybe the only one, but it was the most successful one.
And you said it's because it largely embraced property rights and economic freedom the way the United States was?
Well, if you look at the Argentinian Constitution and many Argentinian laws, they are inspired in the US Constitution and US laws.
So they were doing well then, but you don't hear good things from me today.
No, not really.
From Argentina. What went wrong in the 20th century for them?
That's a very tough question for Argentina, and it's actually a field of study for many. It's like seeing a person who has been shot like 1,000 times, and it's asking which bullet killed this guy, right?
Okay.
So there is a tipping point, which is the Great Depression and World War. So the whole world changes.
Don't tell me about the bullet. Tell me about the machine gun then. What was the general thrust of things?
The general thrust of things is...
We're in Texas. They know about these things.
when Argentina was hit by the effects of World War and the Great Depression, like in many other countries, there was a big change to embrace a welfare state and a different kind of approach to problems like poverty. Commerce was being shut down. International trade, what was big for Argentina, was like almost ceased. And this is when famous Perón came to power. And with Perón, it comes all this wave of populism that now is so common in Argentina. I don't think it would be fair to blame everything in Perón. You have many people after Perón.
So tell me, what's the wave of populism? What type of things did the government do?
Well, they will trick you and give you gifts to think that you are doing good, and actually that's not the case. So I want you to feel that you are doing better economically. So instead of giving you property rights and expecting from you to work, I will like print money and give it to you so you can spend it, and you are under the delusion that you are doing better.
Okay, so it became more of a transfer state, taking from some, giving to others, so starting to undermine those market institutions it used to have.
Yes.
Ed, now, more recently, we've talked a lot about money expansion in the United States, but we really haven't seen any inflation from it yet because most of it's sitting in bank vaults and hasn't ever been loaned out. But Argentina has had a lot of inflation lately. What happened?
Argentina has a lot of inflation through his whole history. So the Argentinian currency starts in 1880 until 1993. Argentina drew 13 zeros outside of a unit of account of its currency so that we can have 1 peso. So if you want to know how much 1 peso today was worth 100 years ago, you need to add 13 zeros. That's 13. How much, 13. I don't even know how to pronounce that number. So 1 and 0, 0, 0, when you hit 13, You need all those matched pesos of today to have 1 peso from almost 100 years ago.
Wow, that's amazing.
The central bank was founded in 1935. If you take what will be the average inflation for every year since 1935 to 2012, the average inflation per year in Argentina is 55%.
The money loses more than half its value every single year.
Exactly.
So if you came to the United States from Argentina and had some pesos and you went back just 4 years later, it's hardly worth anything.
Not even 4 years later. So if 2 or 3 years ago I was back in Argentina, I just arrived and I was going out to dinner with my friends to catch up and have a good time, and I didn't have pesos with me because I just arrived from the US. So I was staying at my parents, and I go to my mother and say, can you please lend me a few pesos to go out for dinner? And she says, yeah, sure, how much you need? And I went blank. I had no idea how many pesos I needed to have dinner at a standard restaurant that you may go any day in the week. And I wasn't in Argentina for 6 months, not 4 years.
Wow.
You lose track of where the prices are.
It must make it really hard for people to do business in an environment where you don't have a basic unit.
It's very hard.
Account.
The way I try to explain this to my students is you're an entrepreneur, you're in the market, you're flying a plane. Your cockpit is, your wind is chill. You don't see what's going on outside. All you rely is all these clocks you have in the cockpit that is telling you how fast you're going, what's your altitude, and so on. If that's okay, if those clocks are giving you right information, you're going to fly, and you're going to reach destiny. If you have inflation and you don't know what's going there, it doesn't matter how much a good pilot you are, you're going to have trouble.
All right, so I don't want to be all depressing on this episode, and, so it's not going to be don't cry for me Argentina, it's going to be cry for Argentina here. How about some places that we can be happy about in Latin America? There's some economic success stories going on down there right now.
Yes, in fact you can divide Latin America in 2 sets of Latin American countries. The countries that follow what is called the socialism of the 21st century, Argentina, Venezuela, Bolivia, Ecuador, and countries that are actually doing much better. The prime example for that is Chile. Chile made institutional reform maybe 20 or 30 years ago.
Right, starting with Pinochet in the 70s.
But they didn't change those institutions, like many other countries in Latin America do. So now that has passed maybe like 20, 30 years, you can actually see the effects. And if you try to track the GDP per capita between Chile and other countries, you can see Chile going through a steady growth all these years, and now has a better quality of life than many countries in Argentina, well, in Latin America like Argentina.
Yeah.
And Chile is a country that is very thin, it's in the Cordillera of the Andes. It doesn't have so much natural resources like Argentina, Brazil, or many other countries do, and it's still a successful case.
Yeah, in fact, we've talked about economic freedom on this show before. They actually, I think they rank number 11 in the world. They're actually freer economically, Chile in Latin America, than we sitting here in the United States
Last
today,
time I checked, Chile ranks 7th, the US ranks 12th.
And actually, Peru is another success story there too. In fact, when I saw their ranking, they're almost as free as the United States now.
Chile is at the top of the list.
But they were more recent.
Right. Chile's top 10, and then you have Peru, Paraguay, which are the 2 other countries that are ranking high, but those are newest cases. So you don't still see the effects of those institutions in place. So when I try to explain this to my fellow Argentinians or somewhere in Latin America, I tell them you have to be careful how you read institutional indices. They are not telling you how your country is doing today. They are telling you what institutions you have today, and that's going to signal you where you're going to be in the future.
Right. Go to a place that's newly free, and they might be growing fast, but
if
they haven't saved up a lot of assets.
All of a sudden takes South Korean institutions, it won't become as wealthy as South Korea overnight.
Right. It's just like a kid graduates here at Texas Tech. They graduate college, they're on a nice new growth path, but they don't have any assets to start with.
Right.
Right. And Argentina would be more like the person in the nursing home. They had some assets that they're living off, but their trajectory isn't too good right now.
Exactly. So Argentina was the opposite case. It started with a very nice position. The institutions were like eroded, and it's one of the only countries, if not the only country, that since World War II and the Great Depression is in a path of underdeveloping. And that's an institutional effect. Mm-hmm. But because of this long-term effect between institutions and the results, it's very hard for people to connect the dots. We are used to thinking those terms. Not everyone is used to thinking those terms.
Well, Nicolas, thanks for joining and giving us an update on what's been going on in Latin America.
Okay, thank you.
I hope you enjoyed today's show. We learned about how, in terms of private enterprise and economic freedom, Latin America is a bit of a mixed bag in which way different countries are heading. On the first half of the show, we learned a little bit about problems of democratic decision making. Often, people are less rational when they're in the voting booth than they are the marketplace. The obvious implication is maybe we should take more things out of the hands of the voters and put them into our hands as private citizens functioning in the economy. Of course, we have a great big catch-22 on that. It's the voting booth that we have to convince that it shouldn't be making decisions over these things and that it should be leaving more to the market. I don't know how to do that. So until then, we're just going to keep talking about how markets function here and hope it takes on with more people in society. See you next time.